These studios, they're not even taking calculated risks anymore. At this point, they're gambling. Today, I want to talk about this very worrying trend of movie budgets being absolutely out of control. And it's all very timely because this past weekend, Joker 2 absolutely bombed at the box office, making only around $40 million domestically and only $121 million worldwide. Those numbers are actually pretty okay if it were any other movie, but not this movie because this movie's budget was over $200 million. And nothing about this budget makes sense. Now, before we start, Todd Phillips, the director, did say that it did not cost $200 million, but Warner has not said anything about this movie's budget. It's allowed the $200 million to just stay out there. And I feel like if it did cost less, they won't want to advertise it as less, especially now with the news that it's bombing. Before we focus on the rest of this industry facing the exact same problem, I just want to focus on Joker 2 just for a little bit because I have no idea how this movie was $200 million. I saw it this past weekend, and I'm not going to go into what I thought of the film or the quality. I did not like it at all, actually, but I really just want to focus on the budget of this movie and the production of this movie because none of it makes sense. On paper, I think this movie could have been made less than the first movie was made for. Sans the cast contracts with the renewals with sequels, same with directors, they typically always get a bump for a sequel, and they also won Oscars, so of course they're going to get a little bump, but no way does that add up to $200 million. It's baffling. If you didn't know, Joker 1 cost around $55 million to $70 million, so this is around 3 times that much. Joker 2, at its essence, was a courtroom drama. That's all it was. A few musical numbers dashed in between, but it was a courtroom drama. 90s films would be laughing at their face at this budget. Do you know how many 90s courtroom dramas there were that would have loved to have $200 million? What the fuck? A Few Good Men, that movie had was stacked. It had Tom Cruise, Jack Nicholson. It was written by Sorkin, produced by Rob Reiner, I believe. Hold on, I'm gonna look up that budget real quick. Few Good Men's budget was around $40 million, and I'm no inflation expert, but even double that, it still wouldn't have added up to $200 million. It's so baffling how this courtroom drama cost $200 million. Let's break it down real quick production-wise. There was the asylum, right? And then they had the jail cells that he was held. There was the viewing room for the TV where they watched the TV, and then there was the visitor room and the outdoor locations as well. But all that had to be practical, right? There's no way they built those sets. And even then, it's just a few locations that they constantly go back to. And then they have the courtroom, which it had to be practical. There's no way they would have built that, right? Maybe? I don't know. But there was the courtroom, and then there were the jail cells in the courtroom, and that you could have just filmed at the asylum as well, assuming that they do have that kind of set. And then they had the city and the staircase, and that's it. And those were all the main locations besides the few musical sets that they had to build, which I think there are only 3 if my memory is correct. So location-wise, this doesn't make sense. But there were no crazy CGI sequences. There was no massive action sequences with a lot of blocking. Yes, there were the dance sequences and there's choreography, but those were all mainly on standing sets. I don't imagine they would cost that much. And this also wasn't a globe-trotting adventure. It's not like they had so many different locations. So this budget doesn't make sense unless it was just massively mishandled production-wise. I don't see it, and maybe it was mishandled. There were quite a few shots in the trailer that were absolutely not in the film, which that does happen all the time, but maybe it is a clue to this film that a lot of these scenes were just shot and they wasted a lot of time and all those scenes wound up on the cutting room floor. They also shot 3 different endings, which that does happen, but I don't see how this was not mismanaged. If it wasn't mismanaged, that means that entire budget went towards the above the line fees, the cast and the director. And no one needs that much money. It's insane. And this week opening wouldn't have been so bad if they just made it for a smarter number. I don't know, around 100 million. The first movie was around 70, so it makes sense that the next one would be around 100, right? But now they're gonna lose so much money just because they spent so much money on it. And this is something that every single studio is struggling with right now. Captain America: Brave New World apparently has a budget of $350 million. Gladiator 2 reportedly has a $250 million to $310 million budget. Red 1's budget is reportedly $250 million, and there are some reports that says that number is false and it's actually higher than $250 million. And we have The Electric State, which is a new Russo brothers movie. It's going to be done for Netflix. There was just a new, first look at it where they released some images online, but that movie has a $320 million budget. These studios are acting like it's still pre-pandemic levels, and they're just pushing all these $200 million projects thinking that they'll all turn a profit. With a $200 million project, you typically have to make 3 times your budget, right? Like, that's the rule of thumb. So $600 million. Though I would argue with today, now most marketing budgets are more than the film, sometimes at least. So I would argue you have to make more than that, like 700 or 800 million, or maybe even $1 billion just to see a profit, because then you might have back-end deals with directors, back-end deals with actors, back-end deals with producers. The more money you make, you can still have to lose a part of it too. So I think the number is higher than 600 million. And this is all okay pre-COVID times, right? Like, it happened all the time where movies were hitting billions of dollars, but there was still risk. There were still a lot of movies that failed. I'm looking at you the last night. But, the whole theater landscape has changed. The push to streaming absolutely decimated theater going. It absolutely changed theater going behavior because people were trained to just stay at home and watch streaming. And while I do think movie going is getting better, I do think audiences are slowly returning to the theater because they like going to the theater, we are still nowhere near where we are from pre-pandemic levels. To put in perspective to show just how much things have changed, in 2018, we had 5 movies hit $1 billion at the box office. In 2019, we had 9 movies hit $1 billion. We're gonna skip 2020 and 2021 because, but post-pandemic in 2022, we only had 3 films hit $1 billion. In 2023, we only had 2 films hit $1 billion. And now in 2024, only 2 films have hit $1 billion at the box office. Now, the year's not over, we still have the holidays, but things are not looking great. And just to add one more little note to that, the top 5 movies this year, the 5th one hit $500 million. It's nowhere close to $1 billion. We are so far away from where we were pre-pandemic. Now, we can argue all we want, right? Like, if Joker 2 was a better movie, sure, maybe it would have made more money, probably would have. Maybe if we had better critic scores, maybe if we had better audience scores, it would have made more money. But even quality films have been struggling both this year and last year. So I don't see it as a way of replicating the success as Joker 1, even if it was a good movie. That hike to $1 billion is still just an incredible feat that is very hard to hit nowadays. And while these movies do provide jobs, I only see it as short term because now they're going to lose money, so now they're not going to have as much money to spend on future movies. And when they do make new movies, they're not going to want to take any risk at all in these movies, which I think is a huge risk in itself. But this is just going to give us more of these generic cookie cutter movies that we've been seeing these past few years. And I get some movies need a high budget, right? Sometimes you just need the money. But I do hope these studios start pushing these filmmakers to creatively be in more different kinds of financial boundaries, because I do think creativity can thrive in certain financial boundaries. I've seen several stories of actors or directors telling stories about, how they had to change the script because they didn't have enough money, and then they made a scene that everyone loved. And just recently I was listening to a podcast with Ryan Reynolds, and he was detailing making Deadpool 1 and how frugal they had to be on that movie. And in the first Deadpool, they apparently had an action sequence at the very beginning that was just way too expensive. And so when they got their budget, they had to rewrite that entire action sequence. And that is how we got that action sequence where Deadpool only had 12 bullets to take down all of the henchmen. And that was a really cool, really creative way to do an action scene. And that was because they got put in a boundary which they had to crawl their way out of. So it can help. So I hope they do that, or I just hope that they push and make more mid-level budget movies or lower budget movies. Because in this day and age, studios cannot tell me that a mid-level, no IP film is higher risk than a high IP $200 million project. We've seen these films fail. But I get where they're coming from, right? Joker 1 made $1 billion. I understand why they made a second movie. I even understand why they were just so okay with just giving this more money, because they thought they were going to get a lot more money and just replicate the success of the first movie. But the entire theatrical landscape has changed. Nothing is a guaranteed hit. Nothing was a guaranteed hit, but even more so in today's environment. So I do hope that they spend their money a bit more wisely, so when they do lose, and they will lose, not every project can be a win, but when they do lose, they spent their money wisely so they don't lose $500 million, which is what Joker 2 could lose. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you prefer this method where studios are doing high risk, high reward projects, even though, it is a very, very high risk and they could lose a lot of money? They could also make a ton of money. Or would you prefer, they go the mid-budget route or the lower budget route, or just, getting the above the line fees figured out? Or maybe there's an idea that you had. Please drop it in the comments, let me know. And if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And if you enjoyed it, please like, comment, subscribe, do all the YouTube buttons, please. I make a new video every single week, so glad to have you here. Glad to have you along this journey if you want to come. I'll see you in the next one.